Those days. I remember those days.
Hello, vinyl community. This is Tommy, and welcome to another musical adventure. Today's adventure, we're going to look at a couple of albums that are special to me. And those of you who are regular watchers of my channel know that I'm a huge fan of Lee Hazlewood. I'm going to go into some background here in a moment on Lee. But if you haven't subscribed, do so. And then you would know that I'm a big fan of Lee Hazlewood. Now, Lee Hazlewood, for me, is probably one of the most underrated, underappreciated music impresarios, if you will, of the 60s. I rank Lee Hazlewood up there with Phil Spector and Brian Wilson in terms of like just a dynamo record producer. I think his records are just as lush and just as interesting. Just put out a lot of great records. Now, he got his start. He's from Oklahoma, Barton Lee Hazlewood. Got his start working out there with, I think it's the V record label. Did a lot of work with Duane Eddy, Rebel Rouser, those great instrumentals, twangy guitar instrumentals. And kind of tooled around, writing and producing and working with several artists. But his big breakthrough was with Nancy Sinatra and the huge, huge hit record, These Boots Are Made for Walking. Written by Lee Hazlewood and produced by Lee, but Nancy, the daughter of Frank Sinatra. And the two records that I want to talk about today have recently been reissued on Light in the Attic Records, who have done a fantastic job of taking care of Lee Hazlewood's catalog. Well, now they've teamed up with Nancy, who he's probably most famous for working with. All her early albums were produced by Lee. And so Light in the Attic have now started to tackle the Nancy Sinatra titles. Now, I did a video way back when on Lee Hazlewood. I encourage you guys to go back and watch it, where I talk about Lee and his records. But these are two records that I want to talk about, like I said, recently reissued. Now, most of you probably know this album, Nancy and Lee. Now, Lee appeared on a lot of Nancy's albums, particularly the ones that he produced. But yeah, this is the one that came out in 1968 on the Reprise record label, produced by Lee. And I'm going to show you guys this is the colored vinyl edition. This is listed as Sundown Metallic Gold and Clear Wax. You can see it up there on the Obi strip. And so this is the strip that comes. I'm going to take this all out and show you guys what's going on with it. But I'm going to break each release down for you. Here is the beautiful booklet that comes with it. Hunter Lee has done a fantastic job with the Lee Hazlewood catalog. And in these books, there are notes. There's interviews. There's an interview with Nancy Sinatra. Sessionography notes. There's just so much information that goes with this. And Light in the Attic, those of you who don't know, Light in the Attic just do a fantastic job with their reissues. And if you're not familiar with Lee Hazlewood's music and you only kind of know Nancy stuff, well, then you know a little bit about Lee. And so very lush, sort of like psychedelic cowboy music. And this album, and I'm not going to show you every page of the book, but this album featured their version of You've Lost That Love and Feeling, which those of you know by the Righteous Brothers. Summer Wine, which was a hit. Also, their version of Jackson. Most people know the Johnny Cash and June Carter version of that song. Now, the Light in the Attic also has one of the what I consider great duet singles of all time. It is Some Velvet Morning, written by Lee. Just a very, very interesting tune. But Lee and Nancy were kind of, or Nancy and Lee were kind of almost joined at the hip. Now, a lot of people wonder if there was any kind of romantic involvement between the two. That's never been confirmed. I think their relationship was professional. I don't know that there was any kind of romance between the two of them. Now, this album, in addition to being produced by Lee, it was arranged by Billy Strange. Most people know Billy Strange's name because he was associated with Elvis. The Wrecking Crew was featured prominently as the band playing on this album. And the album was a big success. It reached number 13 in the UK. Actually, number 13 in the US. It reached number 17 in the UK. So it was a top 20 album. And I'm showing you guys the strip here. This is number 3 in the Nancy Sinatra series from Light in the Attic. You guys can read all that. And of course, here is the back cover. And it talks about the album and the other titles that have come out from that series. There's a compilation, Start Walking, of course, the album Boots, and the one we're going to talk about next, Nancy and Lee again. It also features 2 bonus tracks. The 2 bonus tracks were unreleased up until this reissue. Tired of Waiting for You by the Kinks, and a really groovy version of Love is Strange by Paul McCartney and Wings from the Wildlife album. No. I know before you start going crazy with your keyboard and typing down there, I know that Love is Strange was actually written by, or credited to Bo Diddley. And of course, Mickey and Sylvia were the famous duo. Featured prominently in the Dirty Dancing movie. But the version on here by Nancy and Lee is really, really good. And of course, that leads us to the other album we're going to talk about, Nancy and Lee Again. This just got reissued from Light in the Attic. And this album was incredible to finally get a copy of. The original album came out in 1972 on the RCA label. And it has never been, and I'm going to show you guys the colored vinyl here. This is considered to be Big Red Balloon Swirl. There's several colored editions of these albums. They're pressed at RTI, so they're really good quality pressings of the albums. And again, this one originally came out in 1972, again produced by Lee. And instead of Billy Strange, this album had Larry Mahobarak as the arranger. Now, Larry Mahobarak, my Elvis fans would know that Larry was in the TCB band for a little while. And from what I understand, a later version as well as the original version. Now, the story on this album is a little strange. Lee Hazelwood kind of inexplicably fled to Sweden in the early 70s, late 60s. He kind of ditched everything in LA and the music scene out there and fled to LA, or fled to Sweden. And it was a little bit of I don't know if it was a surprise. According to the interview inside the book here with Hunter Lee, Nancy was not expecting Lee to disappear. But he came back in 1972 and worked with Nancy and made this album. Now, they didn't have a record label at the time, and so it was all kind of up in the air what was going to happen with this material. But RCA eventually picked it up, and they did a huge concert in Vegas that was filmed. Now, Lee was working with some filmmakers in Sweden at the time, and man, I would love to get a copy of that concert. I think some of the clips are on YouTube, but that's where some of these photos are taken of them performing live at the Riviera in Las Vegas. And most of the album have songs that were written by Lee. Most of the tracks, and here's the strip inside. You guys can see here. Trying to show the strip to you guys. And then, of course, the back, along with the other titles. The big centerpiece of this album to me was the Arkansas Coal Suite. And like I said, Lee wrote most of the songs that are featured on the album, but this album is a little bit darker. Nancy does discuss in the interview about the terrible cobbled cover. This picture of Lee was not from 1972, and it really looks, there's nothing about this cover that's remarkable. It's a terrible cover. The album did not do as well as the first one. I don't even know that it charted, but it is a fantastic album, and it's finally getting its due. I think people are discovering because it's available now. It's an album that's pretty rare. Again, the Arkansas Coal Suite by Lee Hazlewood is just a very ambitious track. Also, another track of note on this album is their version of Down from Dover. I'm not going to say a whole lot about it other than it's the Dolly Parton song, and it's pretty dark. There are a couple of bonus tracks. Machine Gun Kelly by Danny Kortchmar, which should have been one of the big hits of Nancy's career, and Think I'm Coming Down, which is a Lee Hazlewood song. There's one song on here that's kind of odd. It's called Tippy Toes. And Nancy kind of alludes to the fact that, it's a little bit of a sore thumb on the album because it doesn't kind of fit with a lot of the theming of the rest of the album. But it's a cool song, and Nancy alludes to the fact that Lee Hazlewood wasn't going to miss on any kind of publishing royalties, so that's on there. It's not a terrible song. It's just pretty light compared to the rest of the album. But this thing, so cool to have it on vinyl again. And those of you who have never heard it, you ought to check it out. And especially if you're fans of the original Nancy and Lee album, Nancy and Lee again, really, really cool. Check it out. From Light in the Attic Records, you can get it in multiple formats, not just vinyl, but I think they even have an 8-track available of it. It's just crazy how they've put this stuff back out. But Nancy and Lee again, Lee Hazlewood and Nancy Sinatra. Also, I think I mentioned it, pressed at RTI. Do you know this album? Do you know Nancy and Lee? Are you a fan? Comment down below. Let me know what you think of these albums. And if you don't know these albums, check them out. They're great. And as fans of music, you should hear them. So grab a hold of Nancy and Lee. Nancy and Lee again. 2 fantastic, fantastic albums. Reissued by Light in the Attic. Albums you should have in your collection. That's all I'll say. Hey, thanks for watching. We'll see you next time.